Hi, I'm Lucian, the designer for Eden Left Behind, a mech exploration TTRPG. Creating abilities for player characters can be tough. You have to fill the niche of each archetype while keeping them all fair and fun. Making abilities doesn't need to be a complex, time-consuming task, however. If you have a solid system foundation, it can come almost naturally. Let's take a look at Heart, the City Beneath. The classes in this game are all very thematic, and the way abilities are made is pretty standard. Abilities in Heart can do essentially 5 things. Grant skill points, grant resistances, let you heal, put a special effect on weapons, or have a narrative effect. Lots of them mix and match between these 5 basic ideas. And then occasionally, you'll get something like, every time you do something, everyone looking at you takes 1 damage, which creates a really great mixture with weirdness that Heart does, and simple gameplay. Heart uses a small dice pool system, which limits the types of things you can do with physical dice, because making any change to a dice pool of only 1 or 2 can be really strong. So dice manipulation abilities are usually limited to once per session or under rare circumstances. For example, one ability lets a player roll an item die instead of their usual dice, or another that lets a player just declare they want their result to be 6. The simple, more common abilities tell players what a usual person could do, and the weird rule-bending powers inform players about what makes their character stand out from the crowd. It all meshes together to make the players feel like they fit in with the weird mind-bending setting of Heart. I'll use Symbaroum as another example, since I'm running a campaign for it soon. There's a collection of abilities that allow a player to either attack or cast spells with different stats than the default, so long as they use the right weapon. This kind of formula allows for players to create the kind of character they want at the simple cost of taking up an ability slot. Another common design Symbaroum abilities have is moving up a die step for specific weapons or armor. Things like attacking with a longsword deals d12 damage instead of d10, or light armor protects you d6 instead of d4. For single die roll games like Symbaroum, there isn't much you can do with how the dice works. So rolling 2 dice or giving a bonus is how a large amount of the abilities work. There is one more thing Symbaroum does though, and that's giving players the ability to skip rolls altogether. The privileged ability allows the player to bypass persuasion checks in their society, and the Lore Master ability allows the player to understand and speak ancient languages. Abilities that allow you to skip rolls in non-combat situations are much more engaging to use for players than granting an advantage to the same thing. They're also much more attractive when choosing abilities. You'll need to pick between getting a damage boost or being able to convince the average person of nearly anything. That becomes a much harder choice. For Symbaroum, a grounded dark fantasy game, these kinds of minor boosts, stat swaps, and puzzle bypasses work well to make players feel like they have an impact in the world, and like what they are doing matters. A 12 damage sword feels very powerful in a world where everyone else's sword does 10 damage. It makes you feel like you're an expert in what you do. But neither of these are my preferred way of designing character abilities. Of course, I put my favorite in the game I'm creating. Eden is pretty light on rules, but as of right now, players can choose from 160 different components when creating a mech. That's quite a lot of unique powers, but it wasn't a struggle to balance or make fun, and all the necessary archetypes had their roles filled without anything being overcomplicated. The trick is creating base systems that can be manipulated in several ways, with varying power levels and restrictions. When playing Eden, you roll a handful of d6s based on your style, skill, and any narrative advantages. It's typically 3 to 5 dice on an average roll. Now let's see how many ways we can manipulate this dice pool. We can cut the highest result, we can add dice to the pool, re-roll chosen dice, or treat mixed successes as full successes. Let's call this bumping a result for the sake of simplicity. Let's put them in an order of power. From weakest to strongest, we have cutting your result, adding more dice to the pool, re-rolling dice, and bumping your result. Using these power tiers, we can line up levels of specificity in requirements. To add dice will be broad, things that trigger very frequently. Re-rolling will be specific, maybe once or twice a scene. And bumping will be very specific, things that won't happen very often or can only be used a limited amount of time. Cuts usually are narratively applied, so having them as something that triggers passively on an ability would only be a downside. So instead, let's make cuts on abilities something the player needs to activate to get some kind of benefit. Even with these requirements and power tiers, balancing might be an issue. So let's attach these abilities onto different locations of a mech. Mech components are organized from external to internal to software to core. When your mech takes critical damage, a component will be destroyed, with the more external parts having priority and then working their way down to the core. So now we can line up 2 different metrics of restriction to create power-appropriate abilities. Let's take the component Headshot Scope, for example. This is an internal component, so it's probably a lens attached to the eyes of your mech. It reads, you may cut one to increase the damage grade of your attack by 1. Declare the cut before rolling. So you take a penalty to increase damage. Simple, decently flavorful, and interacts with the dice pool in one of the listed ways. Now let's look at burst rockets. Another internal component. The rockets are probably stowed away somewhere under the shell of your mech. It says, damage this component to treat conflicts as triumphs when attempting to deal long-range blast damage. Conflicts are the mixed successes and triumphs are the full success, so this is bumping your result, but only for a specific type of damage at a specific range with limited use. There are 8 damage types and 2 ranges in Eden, so if I wanted to, or if you wanted to while homebrewing the game, there are 16 possible components that could be made from the same formula as burst rockets. Just swap out the damage type, or swap out the range, or swap out both. But I didn't do that, and for a good reason. Damage types should be more than just flavor and a few interactions with resistances and weaknesses. So for the burst rocket ability, it fits the theme of missiles doing high amounts of damage with limited uses, as you slowly run out of rockets. If I create this ability for each damage type, the playstyles would all mesh together, and the game would become overbloated with 16 variations of every ability. But it goes to show how easily you can create hundreds of abilities with this method. For abilities that don't fit just one playstyle, creating a variety for damage types and ranges would work. These just need to be chosen with care and intention. Let's make a new ability right now, in fact. I'm making this up as I write the script. So let's grab a dice manipulation. I'll go with the rerolling. A limitation. Maybe this triggers when your mech is badly damaged. Mechs have 15 total hull, so let's make the requirement 7 or less. 7 hull in Eden is decently low. Failing to avoid damage completely causes you to lose 6 hull. So this ability is risky, but rerolling is fairly strong in a game where you're rolling 4 or 5 dice on an average attack. Next, the mech location. This is a pretty good ability, but it comes at the cost of your mech being damaged. So let's make it external. That way, the user has to be careful with getting to their low hull, or the component might be damaged by the time it's able to be used. Lastly, we give it a fitting name. So how about Tooth and Nail, to go with the theme for fighting even when hurt? Okay, Tooth and Nail, external component. Gain a free reroll during your actions while at 7 or less hull. Pretty easy. But this ability is called Tooth and Nail, and it's external, so I feel like we can do a little bit more. The name sounds like it would be a bio component, maybe even a weapon. So let's change how it works just slightly. How about Tooth and Nail, external bio component? Deals close quarters, sharp damage. Gain a free reroll when attempting to use this component at 7 or less hull. Notice how it didn't say when attempting to attack or attempting to deal damage. In Eden, you can use anything for any situation if it would fit the narrative properly. So if you want to use Tooth and Nail to, say, latch onto a wall with your claws, you would get that free reroll when at 7 or less hull. Now we have a flavorful ability that's clear, concise, and uses the same structure as everything else in the game. Creating abilities this way gives them all a consistent design structure, making combos appear without needing to build them in purposefully. With Tooth and Nail, any other components that interact with mech hull would create synergies and combos, making both building and playing mechs engaging. All of these ability examples in Eden use a familiar framing. None of the abilities require you to read an extra piece of text or look up a keyword. They use language that is present throughout the entire book. They are also very quick and to the point. The name of the ability gives all the context needed for what it does, so each ability fits into the boxes given on a character sheet. You don't need an extra piece of paper for anything. With strong rules foundations, tiered bonuses, and consistent language, we can create an endless variety of character abilities that will always mesh with each other, making combinations that even a designer couldn't have come up with. This is my take on character abilities and how they're designed, so I'd love to hear what other people think about this. Let me know in the comments. I try to respond to everything. I post weekly here about mechs, game design, and storytelling, so if you're into that kind of thing, subscribe to see more. Thanks for watching.